The cold stones were her only bed. Night after night, she curled her body on the rough surface, her skin bruised, her bones aching. The ruined temple was silent except for the wind howling through broken walls. She pressed her arms tightly around herself, trying to keep even a little warmth inside. 16 nights had passed like this, and each one felt longer than the last. Her eyes often stayed open until morning because the pain of lying on the stones was worse than the exhaustion that pulled her down. The first night, she thought she would die. The cold had been sharp, biting into her body. She had never slept on bare rock before. She had been raised in comfort once, with blankets and meals. But now she was exiled, thrown away like worthless trash. The second night was no easier. She cried until her throat hurt, but no one came to help her. Her tears dried on her face, leaving salty lines that she rubbed away with her dirty hands. By the fifth night, her body had grown weaker. Her stomach growled with hunger. She searched for scraps outside the ruined temple, finding only dry roots and a little dirty water collected in a stone bowl. She ate without choice. Every sound in the night made her jump. Rats, the shifting stones, the faraway cry of creatures. She clutched her knees and whispered to herself, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." But her voice shook. On the 10th night, she stopped whispering. Her spirit was fading. She lay on her side, her cheek pressed against the cold stone, and stared at the shadows moving along the cracked walls. Sometimes she thought she saw faces in the dark. Sometimes she thought she heard laughter from her old masters. She closed her eyes tightly, telling herself it was only her mind, but the fear still burned in her chest. By the 16th night, she was no longer surprised by pain. Her back was raw, her arms were thin, and her lips were cracked from thirst. Still, she lived. She refused to die, even when her body begged her to give up. She told herself that one more sunrise would come. One more day. If she survived until morning, maybe something would change. Her body shivered as the wind pushed through the ruined temple again. She pulled her legs close, feeling the sharp edges of the stone cut against her skin. Her hands trembled as she tried to cover herself with torn cloth, but the cloth was too small. She had no blanket, no fire, no soft place to rest. Only the stones that felt harder each night. She remembered her past life with painful clarity. Once she had walked proudly, her head high. She had belonged to a powerful house. She had eaten warm food, worn clean clothes, and slept on silk. But that was gone now. She had rejected her master's will, and for that she was punished. Exile was worse than death because it left her alive to suffer. The nights were endless tests. Her body wanted rest, but the stones never allowed her peace. She shifted constantly, searching for a position that hurt less, but there was none. When she finally closed her eyes, her dreams were full of cold darkness. She woke often, gasping, unsure if it was still night or if dawn had come. On the 16th night, her body gave her a warning. Her breath came slow and heavy. Her muscles refused to move. She felt her strength slipping away. She thought, maybe tomorrow I will not wake. And for the first time, she wondered if she should let go. But then her heart fought back. She told herself, not yet, not like this. She had survived 16 nights on hard stone. She would not let the 17th be her last. She turned her face toward the temple doorway, where a slice of the night sky was visible. The stars looked cold, far away, like eyes that did not care. But she stared at them anyway. She thought maybe someone, somewhere, could see her. Maybe someone still remembered she was alive. Her stomach growled again, sharp and painful. She hugged herself tighter. She tried to think of food. Warm bread, fresh fruit, hot soup. The memory only made her more miserable, but it gave her a reason to keep breathing. She promised herself, if I live to morning, I will find food. I will not die on these stones. Every bone in her body hurt. Her lips were bleeding from dryness. Her eyes felt heavy, but she could not fall asleep. She lay there, staring into the dark, listening to her own weak breathing. Each moment was a battle against silence, against loneliness, against despair. Then, deep in the night, she thought she heard something new. A sound not made by rats or wind. It was faint, distant, like footsteps. Her heart jumped. For days she had been alone. No one had come near the temple. Now, on the edge of her 17th night, there was movement outside. She held her breath. Her eyes widened. The footsteps grew closer, slow but steady, echoing against the ruined walls. Fear wrapped around her chest. Was it an enemy? Was it someone who had come to take her back to her masters? Or was it a wild creature looking for food? Her hands pressed against the stones, once ready to push herself up if she had to. Her body screamed with pain, but her will forced her to stay alert. The sound of the footsteps was clear now. Someone was walking toward her. Someone alive. Her heart pounded. 16 nights she had been forgotten, left to rot on stone. And now, on the 17th, someone was here. She did not know if this was salvation or doom, but she knew one thing. Her life was about to change. The footsteps came closer until a shadow appeared at the broken doorway of the ruined temple. The alien girl froze where she lay on the stones, her body stiff with fear. Her breath stopped in her throat. For 16 nights she had been alone, and now someone was standing there, watching. The figure did not move quickly. It waited, as if deciding whether to step inside or leave her there. Her first thought was that her masters had sent someone to bring her back. Panic shot through her chest, and she pulled her weak body tighter against the wall. She wanted to be invisible, but her trembling made the stones scrape beneath her, and the sound betrayed her. The shadow moved closer, and then the light of the moon showed a human face. She stared at him with wide eyes. Humans were strange to her kind, not trusted, not welcome in the places she had once lived. She expected cruelty, maybe laughter at her suffering. But the human did not speak. He only looked at her with quiet eyes, his face half hidden in the darkness. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were too weak. She wanted to shout, to tell him to leave, but her dry throat betrayed her. All that came out was a broken whisper. Still, the human did not step forward. Instead, he lowered something from his shoulder. She saw him place a small bundle near the entrance. The girl narrowed her eyes, confused. The bundle smelled faintly of food. Her stomach tightened at once, a sharp pain rising from her hunger. The human set it down carefully, as if he did not want to frighten her, then stepped back slowly, leaving it there between them. His eyes stayed on her, calm, steady, and then he turned to leave. She could not believe it. Her mind raced. Why would a human leave food for her? What trick was this? Her people had taught her to mistrust strangers, especially men, and especially humans. Perhaps the food was poisoned. Perhaps it was bait to see if she would crawl forward like an animal. She hated the thought. She hated how her hands shook at the idea of eating, but the hunger inside her was stronger than her doubts. For days she had eaten almost nothing, just roots and dirty water. Her lips parted as she stared at the bundle. It was close enough that the smell reached her clearly now, warm bread and dried meat. Her chest ached with the memory of such food. The human was gone. The night was silent again, only the bundle left behind. She waited a long time, listening for his return, afraid that he might jump out from the shadows to laugh at her desperation. But no one came. Slowly, she crawled across the stones, her hands scraping, her knees burning against the rough ground. Every movement hurt, but the smell of the food pulled her forward. Her fingers reached the bundle, and she touched it as if it might disappear. She hesitated, her heart racing. What if it was poisoned? What if the human wanted her dead? But then her stomach twisted again, sharper this time, and she tore open the cloth. Inside was a piece of bread, thick and soft, and a small strip of dried meat. Her eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then she pressed the bread to her mouth and took a bite. The taste exploded on her tongue. Warmth, life, hope. She chewed slowly at first, afraid it was all a dream. Then hunger overpowered her, and she ate quickly, barely stopping to breathe. She finished the bread, then the meat, and licked the cloth clean of crumbs. When it was gone, she sat back, shaking. Her body trembled not just from weakness, but from confusion. Why had he done this? Humans were not supposed to care. Her masters had told her humans were selfish, dangerous, unworthy of trust. Yet this one had left her food and walked away without asking anything. The stones beneath her still hurt, but for the first time in 16 nights, her body felt a little strength returning. She pressed her hand to her chest, her heart beating unevenly. She whispered to herself, "Why?" Her thoughts would not rest. She remembered the look in his eyes, calm, not mocking, not cruel. He had not even spoken a word. He had just left the food. She wrapped her arms around herself and curled up again on the stones, her mind full of questions. She told herself it must be a trap, but deep inside, a tiny spark of doubt grew. What if it wasn't? That night, she fell asleep with crumbs still on her lips, her body slightly warmer. Her dreams were filled not with shadows and laughter, but with the image of the human's quiet eyes. The next morning, she woke to the sound of birds outside the temple. Her body was still weak, but she felt different. She kept turning her head toward the doorway, as if expecting the shadow to appear again. The thought scared her, but it also gave her a strange hope. For the first time since her exile, she was not completely alone. Her stomach grumbled again, and she thought of the bread. She licked her lips, tasting the memory. She wanted to believe he would return. She wanted to believe he might bring more food. But she was afraid too, afraid of what it would mean if he came back, afraid of what it would mean if he didn't. That day, she stayed close to the doorway, listening for footsteps. She hated herself for waiting, but she could not stop. Every small sound made her heart jump. She told herself she didn't need him, that she would survive alone. But when the sun set and darkness came again, her eyes searched the shadows for him. And then, as the night deepened, the footsteps returned. Slow, steady, familiar. The human had come back. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands shook as she waited to see what he would do next. The 17th night began colder than any before. The alien girl lay curled on the stones, her body too weak to fight the shivering that shook her thin frame. Her lips were dry, her breath shallow, and her eyelids heavy as if they carried weights. She told herself she had survived 16 nights, but this one felt different. Her strength was gone. She could not push herself up anymore, could not even whisper the words she had always whispered to herself in the dark. Her mind drifted between sleep and waking, and every sound seemed far away. Then she felt movement near her. At first, she thought it was a dream. The faint sound of footsteps was too steady, too close. She wanted to open her eyes, but even that felt too heavy. When she finally forced them open, the shadow of the human stood above her again. The same man who had left food before, the same man who returned without asking for anything. This time, he did not just leave something behind. He crouched beside her, and she felt his hands slip under her frail body. Her heart jolted with fear. She tried to resist, but her arms were like sticks, her legs too weak to kick. She had no strength left. For a moment, she thought he was taking her away, perhaps back to her masters, perhaps to sell her. But then she realized his grip was not cruel. His movements were careful, almost gentle, as if he feared she might break. He lifted her from the stones, and her body sagged against his chest. Warmth spread through her, where his arms touched her, so different from the frozen rocks she had known for so many nights. She wanted to speak, to ask why he was doing this, but her voice failed. Her head rested against him, and she could hear his heartbeat, strong, steady, alive. The sound comforted her, even as fear twisted inside her. The human carried her out of the ruined temple. The cold air hit her face, but his arms shielded her from the worst of it. She saw the night sky above, stars blinking like distant fires. For 16 nights, those stars had been her only company, and now she was leaving them behind in his arms. Her mind spun with questions, but her body was too weak to resist. They reached a small shelter built from wood and stone, hidden not far from the ruins. Smoke drifted faintly from a fire inside. When he stepped in, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. The crackling of fire filled her ears. He laid her down not on stones, but on something soft, a bed of cloth and fur, simple but warmer than anything she had felt in weeks. The sudden comfort overwhelmed her. She blinked at the firelight dancing on the walls, at the roof above her head. She pressed her hands into the softness beneath her, afraid it might vanish. For 16 nights, her body had ached on hard stone, and now, for the first time, she was sinking into warmth. She trembled, not from cold, but from disbelief. The human brought her water in a small cup. He held it to her lips when her hands could not lift it. The liquid touched her mouth, and she drank greedily until she coughed. He pulled the cup back gently and waited until her breathing slowed. Then he offered it again, and she drank slower this time, her throat no longer burning with dryness. He gave her food too, soft pieces she could chew without effort. She ate with trembling hands, her eyes never leaving him. She waited for the trick, the demand, the hidden price. But he only sat close, silent, watching to make sure she could swallow. When her hunger was eased and her thirst calmed, she leaned back against the bed and closed her eyes for a moment. She had forgotten what it felt like to rest without pain. Her mind whispered warnings, telling her not to trust him, but her body melted into the comfort it had been denied for so long. The human did not speak much. He moved around the shelter, adding wood to the fire, preparing more water. Sometimes his eyes met hers, and she saw no cruelty there, only a quiet determination, as if he had decided she would not die tonight. She wondered why. Why would a stranger care if she lived or died? Why would a human, of all people, give her this comfort? She pulled the fur closer around herself and whispered inside her head that she would not let him trick her. Yet a part of her heart ached with something else, something close to hope. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her as if she was worth saving. The fire warmed her body, and the soft bed calmed her aching bones. She listened to the human moving quietly, the sound of his footsteps soft on the floor. For the first time in many nights, she felt her eyes closing, not from exhaustion, but from peace. Her heart still raced with fear, but her body betrayed her, slipping into sleep. As she drifted away, one thought stayed with her. She had survived 16 nights on cold stones, but on the 17th, a human had carried her into warmth. She did not know if she could trust him, did not know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight she was alive, and she was no longer alone. She woke in the warmth of the fire, the soft bed under her body still strange to her. For a moment she thought it was a dream, that she would open her eyes and find herself back on the hard stones of the ruined temple. But the crackle of the fire was real, and the blanket covering her shoulders was real too. She turned her head slowly and saw the human sitting not far away, his back against the wall, watching the flames instead of her. Her heart pounded. Why had he brought her here? Why was she still alive? She had learned long ago that kindness was never free. Her masters had taught her that every gift carried a price. Nobody ever gave without wanting something in return. She stared at him with narrowed eyes, waiting for him to reveal his demand. When he noticed her awake, he moved quietly, pouring warm water into a small cup. He brought it to her, holding it out with both hands as if showing he meant no harm. She did not reach for it at first. She kept her eyes on him, her body tense. When he came closer, she slipped her hand under the blanket and closed her fingers around a small stone she had hidden there earlier. It was her only weapon, rough and sharp at the edges. If he tried to touch her, she would strike him, even if it cost her the little strength she had left. The human knelt beside her bed. He offered the cup again, his hand steady, his eyes calm. She searched his face for any sign of trickery, but found none. Slowly, she took the cup, her other hand still clutching the stone in secret. She sipped the water carefully, watching him over the rim of the cup. He did not move closer. He only waited until she finished, then took the cup back and placed it aside. He gave her a small piece of food next, simple bread softened with broth. She hesitated, her stomach twisting with hunger, but her mind screaming warnings. Still, she ate. The warmth spread inside her body, stronger than the cold fear in her heart. She felt herself growing steadier, but her distrust did not fade. She kept the stone hidden in her hand, ready to strike. The silence between them stretched long. At last she spoke, her voice rough from disuse. Why? It was the only word she could manage. Why was he feeding her? Why was she in his shelter? Why had he carried her from the stones? The human did not answer at once. He only looked at her, his eyes steady, almost sad. Finally he said softly, "Because you needed help." The words made her chest tighten with confusion. She shook her head. It was too simple. Nobody helped for such a reason. Her masters had taught her that weakness was shame, that no one would protect the weak without demanding obedience in return. She stared at him, searching for the hidden meaning, but he spoke no more. The fire crackled louder, filling the silence. She lay back, the blanket pulled high under her chin. Her fingers still gripped the stone tightly, the sharp edge biting into her skin. She told herself she could not trust him, that at any moment he would show his true face. But another part of her mind whispered that he had already shown it, and it was nothing like what she expected. He moved to the far side of the room, giving her space. He did not try to touch her, did not try to command her. He sat down with his back against the wall, folding his arms loosely across his chest, and closed his eyes as if preparing to sleep. She stared at him in disbelief. If he meant to harm her, why would he sit so far? If he wanted to control her, why would he let her keep the blanket, the food, the safety of the bed? The hours passed slowly. She did not sleep. She lay in the warmth, her body fighting against her restless mind. The stone in her hand grew heavier, but she refused to let it go. Every time the human shifted slightly, her breath caught. Every time the fire snapped, she jerked awake, ready to fight. Yet nothing happened. He never came closer, never reached for her, never even opened his eyes for long. He simply sat in silence, his breathing calm and even, as if he had already forgotten his own danger in keeping her here. She could not understand him. Her distrust battled with a strange feeling rising in her chest. Relief. For the first time since her exile, she was warm, fed, and not alone. It scared her more than the stones ever had. If she allowed herself to believe this, and he betrayed her later, the pain would be worse than the cold nights. Still, as dawn's light crept through the cracks of the shelter, she realized her fingers had loosened around the stone. At some point in the long night, her grip had weakened. The rock slipped from her hand and rolled quietly onto the furs beside her. She stared at it, shocked at herself. She had let her guard down. But the human did not stir, did not even open his eyes at the sound. She pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes briefly. Her heart whispered that maybe he was different. Her mind warned her not to be fooled. Between those two voices, she lay trapped, unsure which one to believe. But one truth she could not deny: the 17th night had not killed her. She was still alive, and it was because of him. The morning light filled the small shelter, soft and golden, breaking through the cracks in the walls. She stirred under the blanket, blinking against the glow. Her body felt a little stronger than before, though her muscles still ached from weeks of hardship. She turned her head and saw the human sitting near the fire, repairing something with his hands. He looked calm, focused on his work, as if her presence was not a burden to him at all. She studied him quietly, her heart still filled with questions. Why was he helping her? Why had he not left her to die like the others? Her fingers rubbed against the fur of the bed, still not trusting the softness. For so long, she had believed that every kindness hid cruelty, that every hand extended would strike sooner or later. But this man had not asked for anything, not even a word of thanks. Her curiosity broke through her silence. "Why me?" she asked, her voice hoarse but stronger than the night before. The human paused in his work. He lifted his eyes to her and studied her for a moment, as if weighing the answer carefully. "You remind me of myself," he said at last. His tone was quiet, but there was a weight in his words, something deeper than pity. She frowned, confused. "You?" she whispered. "How?" He set aside the tool he was holding and leaned back against the wall. His eyes were fixed on the fire now, the flames reflecting in them. "I know what it is like to be left behind," he said, "to be thrown away by the ones who should have cared." Her breath caught. She had not expected such words. He spoke them with no hesitation, as if they were scars he carried openly. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing at the pain in her back, and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She wanted to hear more, but she feared the answer might hurt her heart even more than silence. The human continued without her asking. He told her of his own past, how once he had belonged to a group, trusted them, believed he was safe among them. But then came betrayal. They had abandoned him in a place where survival seemed impossible. He had been left for dead, just as she had been cast out to the stones. "I remember the cold nights," he said softly. "I remember lying there, thinking no one would come. The hunger, the fear, the way every shadow felt like an enemy. I thought I would never see another dawn. But I did. Somehow, I did." Her eyes fixed on him. His voice was steady, but she could hear the pain buried under his calm. It was the same pain she carried, the same loneliness that had gnawed at her every night. For the first time, she saw not just a stranger, not just a human, but someone who had walked the same road of suffering she was on now. She lowered her gaze, her throat tight. "And now you see me," she said bitterly. "You see yourself in me. Is that why you saved me?" He looked at her again, and his eyes softened. "I saved you because I couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not when I know what it feels like." Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, but her mind still wrestled with doubt. Her people had always said humans were selfish creatures, ruled by greed. Yet here he was, offering her food, warmth, and safety without demand. His story was real. She could see it in the way he spoke, in the shadows of his expression. The silence between them stretched, but it was no longer sharp and dangerous. It was heavy, filled with unspoken understanding. For the first time, she did not clutch at a stone for protection. She only held the blanket close, her eyes searching his face for truth. After a while, he stood and poured more water for her. He handed it over gently, as always, but this time she accepted it without suspicion. She drank slowly, then asked in a whisper, "Do you hate them, the ones who left you?" He hesitated before answering. His jaw tightened. "I did," he admitted. "For a long time. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel the pain I felt. But hate is heavy. It makes you weak, not strong. Carrying it doesn't heal you. It only keeps the wound open." She listened in silence, her heart trembling. His words cut deep because she too carried hate. For her masters, for the ones who cast her out. It burned inside her, keeping her alive but also chaining her to misery. She turned her face away, tears stinging her eyes. She did not want him to see how much his words touched her. He did not press her to speak. He simply added more wood to the fire and let the warmth spread. His presence filled the room without suffocating her. She realized then that he was not trying to own her pain. He was only showing her that she was not alone in it. Her body still ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in many nights. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, almost too soft to hear, "I don't want to hate anymore." The words surprised even her, slipping out before she could stop them. The human looked at her, and for the first time she saw him smile, a small, tired smile, but real. "Then you're stronger than you think," he said. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling unevenly. The distrust was still there, but it was weaker now, replaced by something fragile and dangerous, hope. She feared it, because hope was what hurt most when it was broken. Yet she could not push it away. Not when he had spoken of nights as cold as hers, not when his scars reflected her own. The fire burned steady, warming the small shelter. She lay back on the bed, her eyes still on him. For the first time since her exile, she felt that maybe she did not have to fight alone. Maybe, just maybe, this human was not her enemy. She closed her eyes, holding the thought close, as if it might keep her alive through another night. The days passed slowly, and the alien girl began to feel a little stronger. Her body still carried bruises from the stones, but the food, water, and warmth of the fire gave her new life. She no longer woke shivering each night, though her heart still carried fear. The human never asked for anything in return, never raised his voice, never forced her to do something against her will. This made her feel safer, but also more confused. She wanted to understand him, but her thoughts were always interrupted by the same shadow, the fear of her masters finding her. That fear became real one evening. The sun had just set, and the shelter was glowing with firelight when distant voices carried through the forest. She froze, her hands tightening on the blanket around her shoulders. The sound was rough, sharp, too familiar. Her blood turned cold. She knew those voices. They belonged to the ones who had cast her out, the ones who had ordered her to sleep on stones like an animal. Her breath quickened. She whispered to the human, "They are here." He looked up from the fire, his eyes narrowing as he listened. He could hear them too. The crunch of boots on dry leaves, the metallic sound of weapons, the low laughter of men who thought themselves in control. The alien girl pressed her back to the wall, trembling. "They've come for me," she said in a broken voice. The human stood, his face calm but his body tense. He reached for the simple blade resting near the door, holding it with quiet certainty. "Then they'll have to go through me," he said. Her heart pounded. She could not believe his words. Why would he risk himself for her? She was nothing to him, an exile, a stranger from another world. Yet his stance was strong, his eyes fixed on the doorway, as if it was natural for him to protect her. The footsteps grew louder. Shadows moved outside the shelter. Her old masters appeared, dressed in dark armor, their faces cruel and familiar. The leader stepped forward and sneered when he saw her inside. "So," he said, his voice filled with mockery, "the dog found comfort with a human. How fitting." Shame burned her cheeks, but before she could lower her head, the human spoke. His voice was steady, louder than the fire. "She's not yours anymore. Leave." The masters laughed, the sound harsh and cold. "And who are you, human?" the leader sneered. Do you think you can claim what belongs to us? She is ours to punish, ours to break. Step aside, or we will take you too." The girl's body shook as she watched. Every part of her expected the human to step back, to surrender her, to save himself. That was what people always did, protect themselves first. She waited for him to betray her. But he did not move. He planted his feet more firmly and raised the blade. "She is not property," he said. "If you want her, you'll have to kill me." The laughter stopped. The men looked at each other, surprised by his defiance. The leader's eyes narrowed in anger. "Then you will die with her," he spat, raising his weapon. The fight erupted in an instant. The human moved fast, his blade clashing against theirs, sparks flying in the firelight. The girl pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing with terror and awe. She had seen humans fight before, but never like this. He fought not for glory, not for power, but for her. Every strike he made was sharp with determination, every step taken to shield her from harm. The masters shouted in fury, surrounding him, but he did not back down. His movements were rough, not perfect, but they carried the weight of someone who refused to lose. He blocked a strike aimed at her, pushing the attacker back with sheer strength. Another came at him from the side, and he twisted, his blade flashing in the firelight, cutting the man's arm. The alien girl's hands shook as she gripped the blanket tighter. Her body screamed at her to stay hidden, to let him fight, but her heart ached. She could not watch him stand alone. She reached for a broken piece of wood near the bed, her fingers trembling, but her will steady. As the human fought, the leader lunged forward, aiming his weapon at the girl. Her eyes widened in terror, but before the strike could reach her, the human stepped between them. The blade cut across his arm, blood staining his sleeve, but he did not fall. With a roar of anger, he shoved the leader back, his own blade pressed against the man's throat. The room went silent. The other men froze, watching as their leader's life hung on the edge of the human's blade. The firelight flickered across the human's face, showing not fear, but a burning resolve. "She is free," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you come again, you won't leave alive." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the leader snarled and signaled his men to retreat. Their footsteps faded into the night, leaving only the crackle of fire and the heavy sound of breathing behind. The human lowered his blade and staggered slightly, blood dripping from his wound. The girl rushed to him, forgetting her fear, forgetting her doubts. "You are hurt," she cried, her hands hovering near his arm. He shook his head, his eyes still calm despite the pain. "It's nothing. You're safe now." Her heart twisted painfully. She stared at him, unable to speak. No one had ever stood for her like this. No one had ever faced danger just to keep her alive. She felt her throat tighten, tears rising in her eyes. For the first time, she understood. This human was not like the others. He was willing to fight for her, even bleed for her. She pressed the cloth of her blanket against his wound, her hands trembling. "Why?" she whispered again, the same question she had asked before. But this time, the answer did not come in words. It came in the way he looked at her, steady and unbroken, even through the pain. In that moment, she knew her life had changed forever. The 17th night had brought her to his bed, but this night had given her something greater, someone who would not abandon her, no matter the cost. The fire was dying low, its glow softer now, but the shelter still carried the warmth of the battle that had just ended. The human sat against the wall, his arm bleeding from the cut he had taken while protecting her. The alien girl knelt beside him, pressing cloth against the wound with shaking hands. Her eyes were wide, her breath uneven. She had never touched anyone like this before, never cared for someone else's pain. But now, her whole being focused on him, afraid that if she let go, he would slip away. He winced as the cloth pressed into his arm, but he did not pull away. His eyes remained steady, fixed on her face instead of his wound. She avoided his gaze at first, ashamed of the tears slipping down her cheeks. Finally, she whispered, "You should not have done that. Not for me." His lips curved in the faintest smile. "I had to." Her chest tightened. Those words were simple, but they cut deeper than any blade. No one had ever said them to her before. All her life, she had been treated as less than nothing, as property, as a burden. But this man, a stranger, had risked his life to stand between her and death. She looked at him with trembling eyes, and for the first time, she did not see herself as broken. She saw herself through his eyes, someone worth saving. She tied the cloth tighter around his arm, her hands clumsy but careful. He watched her without complaint, his breathing slow and calm. When she finished, she sat back and hugged the blanket to her chest. Silence filled the room, but it was not the same heavy silence of before. It was softer, filled with something unspoken. Her thoughts spun. For so long, she had believed kindness was always a mask, that every act of help hid a cruel demand. But the human had asked for nothing. He had given her food, water, warmth, and even his blood without claiming her in return. The truth frightened her, because it meant her old world had been a lie. If one human could care without reason, then perhaps everything she had been taught about strength and weakness was wrong. The human leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. She studied his face in the flickering light. He looked tired, worn, scarred by his own past, but strong in ways her people could never understand. He had carried pain like hers, yet he chose not to pass it forward. Instead, he used it to shield someone else. She wondered if that was what true strength looked like. Hours passed, and dawn slowly colored the sky outside. She rose quietly and stepped to the doorway. The air was fresh, the forest still damp with dew. She breathed deeply, the cool wind filling her lungs. For the first time in many days, she felt alive. The stones that had once bruised her body seemed far away now, like a nightmare she was finally waking from. But her peace did not last long. Her mind replayed the faces of her old masters, their sneers, their laughter. They would come again. She knew it. They would not forgive her for escaping their control. Fear twisted inside her. But when she turned back and saw the human resting by the fire, her fear lessened. She was not alone anymore. When he woke, she told him what she knew. "They won't stop," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "They will return with more men. They will not accept losing me." He met her eyes calmly. "Then we'll be ready." Her heart leapt at the word "we." It was not just her fight anymore. She nodded slowly, a strange fire building inside her chest. For 16 nights, she had curled on cold stones, too weak to fight back. But now something had changed. She was no longer the broken exile they thought she was. She had someone beside her who believed she was worth defending. The human began to prepare, sharpening his blade, strengthening the shelter, teaching her how to hold a weapon. At first, she trembled with every strike, her hands clumsy, her body still weak. But he was patient, guiding her movements, steadying her arms. Each day she grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. She felt the walls of fear inside her start to crack. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she stood outside with him, holding the weapon he had given her. Her hands still shook, but her eyes were steady. She looked up at him and whispered, "I want to fight too." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then fight not for revenge, but for life. Fight because you deserve to live free." The words burned into her heart. They were unlike anything her masters had ever told her. She gripped the weapon tighter, her jaw set with new determination. For the first time, she felt she had a choice in her own story. The day her masters returned, she did not hide behind the human. She stood beside him. Their enemies came with anger and arrogance, expecting her to cower, to beg for mercy. But when they saw her holding a blade, standing tall at the human's side, their laughter faltered. The battle was fierce. The human fought as he always did, with strength born of survival. But this time, she fought too. Her strikes were clumsy at first, but each one carried the weight of 16 nights of suffering, of humiliation, of pain turned into fire. She felt her fear turn into power, her weakness into resolve. When the last of her masters fled, defeated, she stood in the clearing, her chest heaving, her body shaking not from fear but from victory. She looked at the human, his face bloodied but alive, and something inside her broke free. She was no longer the girl forced to sleep on stones. She was no longer a slave to her past. She dropped her weapon and fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The human came to her, kneeling beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She looked up at him through her tears, her voice trembling but filled with truth. "I am free," she whispered. He gave her a small nod, his eyes steady on hers. "Yes, you are." That night, she lay once more on a soft bed, but it was not just the comfort that filled her. It was the knowledge that she had fought, that she had chosen her own path, and that she was no longer alone. The 17th night had given her warmth, but this night gave her something even greater: hope for a life worth living.